Welcome to this explainer. Few questions have captivated scientists, theologians, and philosophers quite like this one. Where did we actually come from? And how did life as we know it even begin? It's a massive puzzle. Today, we're going to unpack the core arguments of this incredibly complex topic, going straight to the academic source material where these debates actually unfold. Today, we're acting as impartial reporters. We are drawing heavily from peer-reviewed theological studies, specifically a really comprehensive paper published in the e-Journal of Religious and Theological Studies. We're going to explore exactly how science and theology intersect on this deeply debated issue. We'll look at the data, the critiques, and the philosophical frameworks, letting the source material speak entirely for itself. All right, here's our roadmap for today. First, the origin debate. Second, evolution and missing links. Third, the creationist critique. And finally, 3 evangelical perspectives. Let's jump right into section 1, the origin debate, framing the mystery. So, right at the core of all this, we're looking at 2 fundamental viewpoints. You've got the creation model, which relies on deliberate divine design, versus the evolution model, which posits mechanistic, natural processes. The source text explains that the creation model asserts the universe emerged through deliberate actions driven by a specific purpose. Conversely, the evolution model contends that the universe formed purely through unguided, natural laws and random chance. And the implications here? They're absolutely massive for how we view ourselves. It really comes down to human dignity. Whether humanity fundamentally bears the image of a divine creator, or if we're simply the result of descent with modification from a shared ancestor with apes. Moving right along to section 2, evolution and missing links, the Darwinian framework. To really grasp the evolutionary side of the debate, we have to look at its core assumptions. Darwinian evolution relies on a sequence of random mutations and natural selection, built upon a few key developmental milestones. According to the source material, this theory assumes that, originally, non-living matter transitioned into living organisms through spontaneous generation. From there, it assumes all life shares a common ancestry, progressing from single-celled organisms to complex multi-celled life. Invertebrates become vertebrates, fish evolve into amphibians, then reptiles, and ultimately into mammals. It is a grand, epic process driven by survival of the fittest, where nature favors organisms that adapt to their environments over vast stretches of time. Now, to understand the hunt for a missing link in the fossil record, we have to define macroevolution. The source text emphasizes that macroevolution refers to the large-scale changes that create entirely new species. We're talking about the theoretical process where totally novel anatomical structures develop, like a fish developing lungs, or that crucial transition from an ape-like ancestor to a modern human. It's the sweeping biological change that pushes life from one major category into another. Here is where scholars draw a really explicit line in the sand: microevolution versus macroevolution. The text notes that microevolution is undeniable, observable variation within a species. Think about breeding different types of dogs. That happens all the time. However, creationist critics point out that a cat never actually evolves into a dog. The whole missing link metaphor arises right here. It refers to the expected transitional fossils that would prove those macroevolutionary leaps, those halfway points between entirely distinct species. Which brings us to section 3, the creationist critique, physics, biology, and probability. Okay, let's look at the scientific pushback, starting with physics. Critics argue that an eternal, self-created universe actually contradicts fundamental laws of physics. The source cites the law of conservation of energy, which states mass and energy are neither created nor destroyed in the physical universe. But when you couple that with the law of entropy, which dictates that the universe tends toward non-recoverable energy loss, scholars argue the universe is slowly wearing out. And think about it. If it's wearing out, it must have been new at some point, right? This is a huge challenge to the idea of an eternal, self-existing material universe. It strongly suggests there had to be a definitive beginning. Shifting over to biology, it's fascinating to note that even Charles Darwin himself saw a potential breaking point for his own theory. As he famously wrote, "If it could be demonstrated that any complex organ existed which could not possibly have been formed by numerous, successive, slight modifications, my theory would absolutely break down." This quote perfectly sets up a major creationist concept known as irreducible complexity. The idea is simple. If an organ requires all of its parts simultaneously just to function, a slow, piece-by-piece evolution simply wouldn't work. And a classic example creationists love to use for irreducible complexity, the bombardier beetle. They argue its intricate chemical defense mechanism could not have evolved gradually. According to the text, this beetle mixes enzymes with hydrogen peroxide and hydroquinones to produce a noxious spray of caustic chemicals expelled at a scalding 212 degrees Fahrenheit out of maneuverable rear nozzles. I mean, it's practically a biological tank. Critics ask, how could such a volatile, dangerous system evolve randomly? If it wasn't fully functional from day one, a random mutation of explosive chemicals would have literally just blown the beetle up, ending its evolutionary line on the spot. Then there's the fossil record itself. Scholars point out stark discontinuities, noting that even evolutionary biologist Richard Dawkins acknowledges the sudden appearance of complex animals in the Cambrian era. The source highlights that rather than finding this beautiful, unbroken chain of transitional fossils, those so-called missing links, paleontologists very often just encounter gaps. Distinct, fully formed species seem to appear abruptly in the earliest fossil-bearing layers, which is a really perplexing challenge to the expectation of a gradual, continuous evolutionary transition. And if we want to talk probability, check out this mind-boggling number. This represents the extreme mathematical odds of life evolving spontaneously by chance on a single planet. The source cites astronomer Carl Sagan's estimate, one chance in a number represented by a 1 followed by 2 billion zeros. To put that completely insane math into perspective, it would take 6,000 books at 300 pages each literally just to write out the zeros in that number. Because of this, critics argue that relying on pure chance for the origin of the universe requires just as much, if not more, faith than believing in a deliberate creator. So, with these incredibly stark contrasts in scientific and theological models, it begs a massive question. Is any real harmony between these two views actually possible? Or are they just permanently locked in contradiction? Let's explore that in Section 4. 3 evangelical perspectives, seeking synthesis. If we map out the spectrum of evangelical thought on this, we essentially get 3 main camps regarding the age of the Earth and macroevolution. First, scientific creationism holds to a young Earth of less than 10,000 years, taking the 6 days of Genesis quite literally. Then you have theistic evolution, which accepts an ancient billion-year-old universe and Darwinian macroevolution, basically believing evolution was simply the tool God used. Finally, progressive creationism accepts an ancient universe but rejects macroevolution entirely. Zooming in on those 2 older Earth models, we see a huge dividing line. Theistic evolution totally embraces macroevolution. They suggest God infused a spiritual soul into an evolved primate to create the very first human. But the source text actually critiques this, noting it lacks grounding in scientific facts and leans a bit more toward deism. Progressive creationism, on the other hand, embraces the observable microevolution within species, but firmly insists that the major categories of life, and especially humanity, were the result of direct, special acts of creation over long, non-literal days or epochs. Ultimately, the author of our source text proposes progressive creationism as the most balanced model. They argue it beautifully respects both the scientific observations of an ancient universe and the distinct biblical boundaries of creation. The idea is, by viewing both the book of nature and the book of scripture as authored by the exact same creator, they shouldn't contradict. Where contradictions do appear, the author argues, it's actually human interpretation of either the science or the scripture that's flawed. This view affirms microevolution but firmly rejects macroevolution, citing that lack of missing links, and affirms the direct creation of human beings. As we wrap up this explainer, it leaves us with a pretty profound thought. As our scientific tools and theological understandings continue to evolve, what spectacular new discoveries are waiting for us in the quest to understand our true origins? Will future findings widen the gap or finally provide the missing link that unites them both? Whether you lean toward mechanistic evolution, a young Earth creation, or some synthesis of ancient epics and intelligent design, the search for truth absolutely continues. Thank you so much for joining me on this deep dive into the source material. Stay curious, keep learning, and I'll see you in the next explainer.